Okay, we're going to get started. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 9th presentation in the virtual history series presented by Baltimore Heritage and the Baltimore Architecture Foundation. And this week with partners of the Baltimore Museum of Industry. This is Nathan Denny's Associate Director of the Baltimore Architecture Foundation. First, thank you to everyone who donated to be with us. Your support has been vital as we continue to work from home and deliver virtual programs. Before we get started, I have a couple of announcements. First, we are taking a break next week for the 4th of July holiday. We will be back on July 10th with a presentation on the state of historic preservation in Baltimore. On July 17th, we will be looking at Green Book sites in Maryland. And on July 24th, we will be taking a look at expressways that divide communities around Druid Hill Park with a presentation about environmental justice. And now today's presentation. We are departing from our usual format to present a panel discussion on the future of the workplace. I'd like to introduce our moderator, Suzanne Frasier, a fellow of the American Institute of Architects, immediate past president of AIA Baltimore, board member of the Baltimore Architecture Foundation, and associate professor and chair of the Department of Undergraduate Design at the Morgan State School of Architecture and Planning. And before we get started, please remember to add your questions to the Zoom chat box. We will get to as many as we can at the end of the presentation. With that, take it away, Suzanne.
Nathan, thank you so much. It's so exciting to be here today. I also want to thank our host, the Baltimore Museum of Industry, Baltimore Heritage, and the Baltimore Architecture Foundation, and also AIA Baltimore for all their support for this afternoon. Today's agenda starts with brief remarks from our 3 distinguished panelists. Then we will continue with a moderated panel discussion and conclude with a question and answer session. So as we go through the next hour together, please do put your questions in the Zoom chat box. I welcome you all. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. And now I want to introduce our panel. Our interior designer, Amah Dokyi, is the global store designer for the Americas at Under Armour. Ms. Dokyi is also an adjunct faculty member at Morgan State University's Interior Design degree program. Our landscape architect is Ben Boyd. Ben is an associate at Mahan Rykiel Associates in Baltimore. He is also the current president of the Maryland chapter of the American Society of Landscape Architects. And our architect is Ehren Gaag, design director and principal at Gensler's Baltimore office. As a design leader and product design expert, Ehren advises clients on next generation workplaces and dynamic office space. So welcome, Amah, Ben, and Ehren. Thank you so much for being our expert panelists today. We'll start with our panelist architect, Ehren Gaag, and follow up with the landscape architect, Ben Boyd, and then the interior designer, Amah Dokyi. Ehren?
Okay, I think I've got the control of the screen. Nice to meet you all virtually here. This worked a minute ago. There we go. Yeah, so Gensler is a very large architecture and interior design firm, and workplace is our thing. That is probably the bulk of our work over the world, really. And one of the things about Gensler is we really love to do research, because we want to make sure we know the kind of pulse of the market and how the future is going to look as much as we possibly can. So we've done a lot of work on the idea of what COVID, the impact of COVID, and how it's really coming to affect and all of our markets, but specifically the workplace market. And one of the things we've done lately is do this work from home survey. And really what that does is it takes 2,300 workers, and you can see by the slide in the center, it's equal between millennials, Gen Zs to Gen X to baby boomers, and in all kinds of different levels of leadership and in all kinds of different markets, and went through a series of questions to find out what they're experiencing. And really what we're finding out is we have a really unbelievable opportunity to rethink workplace in the future. what we're really finding is that only 12% anyway, really want to work from home all the time. And 70% of the people really want to be in the office for the majority of the week. And there's a number of reasons for what that actually is. And it has to do with, it has to do with the ideas that you're learning more about your craft and you're more about your job, especially for millennials and younger staff, what to do from the people who have experience in the veterans of the industry. So if you're not in front of those people all the time, it's much, much harder to actually do the work. Plus, as you're younger, sometimes you don't have an appropriate place to actually work from home. You don't have a place that's kind of free from your kids or whatever, and it's very difficult to actually kind of get that together. So there's actually a large majority of people really do want to get back into the office altogether. We do a lot of listening to clients, and I can't see all of my screen, unfortunately. We've done all kinds of roundtables and things directly with our clients. And really what we're coming up to is the idea that we have in the workplace, there's immediate actions. There's the idea that you're taking people you're spacing people out so people can return in a safe manner. We're finding ways that you can lead the change. And that's the idea that you're separating people and using your digital tools as best you can. And then we're understanding what the reimagined workplace is. And that's really the meat of the matter that we're getting to. And it's how do you use the outdoor spaces? How do you reimagine what a meeting room is? If many people do want to work from home several days a week, how do you then rework the office space so there's actually less me space and more we space? Because what you're coming in for is really to meet with people and experience and gain from their experience. And we're looking at the building itself, not just the interiors, but how does that actually come across? Is if elevators are going to be an issue where you only get 2 people in an elevator when you used to get 6 or 7, wait times are going to be drastically extended. So our stairs going to be far more important. Is the layout of the office, like in the upper left, I'm calling something called the office holes. And is that idea is a combination between office and cubicle, so you get better separation between people and more wall space than to kind of project ideas on. These are all the things we're looking at right now, and there's going to be a ton of things coming out. But right now, we'll just have a great conversation. And then I'll pass this on.
Ehren, thank you so much. And Ben?
I think I have control here. Hi again, everybody. Welcome. Thanks, Ehren, for that great start to this discussion. Let me see if I can get to the next slide here. Great. And this is a good slide to start on. Again, my name is Ben Boyd. I'm a landscape architect. I'm also the president of Maryland ASLA. It's a great slide to start with because this is our office space, which was actually done by Gensler, and we really enjoy it, but we've had to really take a lot of considerations into how to shift this space to work in this current environment. I think this pandemic has challenged different parts of our work life. For me personally, again, I'm at Mahan Rykiel Associates, but also the work that we have to do as a volunteer organization at the ASLA is very different, and how we've had to adjust and things we've had to consider and really sacrifices we've had to make have been very varied. And what we've tried to do is take a lot of input from our members and from staff and make adjustments that work with people's lives, but also allow us to get the work done as much as we can. It doesn't help that the economy is a little slower at the moment, but what I wanted to highlight was really a difference between the traditional work environments, a lot of what we were just talking about, and a lot of really important things to workers like us, but also the work environments for those that don't necessarily work in a traditional office, that have to interact with the public realm in order to get their work done. So to start on workplaces, landscape architects, we've been polling our members and asking around with our with other professionals that are adjacent to us. And what we found is that communication between other professionals and each other and in the office has been really key to actually doing the work. I think collaborative design is very hard, as Ehren talked about, It's hard to learn. It's hard to share ideas when you're confined to a space, as many of you, I'm sure, have experienced. And so facilitating collaboration, kind of this offhand thing that happens in the studio, is really, really challenged. At the same time, I think that one of the aspects of office space that has, for the longest time, I think been described as more of an amenity, is more of an important thing, and that's access to open space. The vast majority of workers, you work in an urban area or in a suburban office, maybe there's open space around, maybe there's a public park nearby, but by and large, most Americans don't have access to open space while they're at work. And many don't actually, because of that, because they're at work most of the time, they come home, they have other responsibilities, don't very much time outside. And so I think we have an opportunity to do is try to integrate that idea back into the psyche of Americans, to say, like, this is very important to be part of your day, to be part of your office design and work. And at the same time, those that don't work in a traditional office, those that have to be on the street, go in and out of a restaurant, work at a grocery store, or serve you at an outdoor dining space, how do we those and have those spaces adapted and updated to work better, because of all the lessons that have been learned in the spread of virus very, very quickly. There's going to be other challenges that come up in the future. They might be the same, might be different. And how, as landscape architects, can we react to change public open space to improve those situations? One of the things that I was really happy the city of Baltimore, or the Neighborhood Design Association, the Neighborhood Design Center put through was the Design for Distancing competition. We had an entry. A lot of landscape architects were successful in that competition, sharing ideas on simple interventions in public space that can create, great solutions that can be proven and then made permanent if they work. Thank you very much. Thanks again, everybody. Happy to be here.
Thank you, Ben. Great shout out to our beloved NDC. Now I'm going to turn it over to Amah, our interior designer. Amah, you're muted.
There we go. Sorry about that, everyone. Thank you again. My name is Meetochi, and I'm the global store designer for the Americas at Under Armour. And we just like to sometimes go over like our brand mission, Under Armour makes you better. We aim to inspire you with performance solutions you never knew you needed. You can't imagine living without. We are definitely the human performance company that gives you the edge to push beyond any limit. We do footwear, sports apparel, and we're really focused on our consumers. So I just wanted to explain a little bit about what global store / retail design is and how that kind of ties in with like interior design. There's a lot of cross-functional teams that we use to create a space because, our focus is to make sure customers are safe and have a great shopping experience. But the main thing right now with the pandemic is making sure that our customers are very safe when they go into any of our stores, and make sure that they are comfortable. Store design is really like a creative and commercial discipline that combines many disciplines to create a space for consumers. We work with visual merchandise, marketing, creative, experience, fixture design, operations, IT, and asset protection. And it's interesting going through this pandemic, trying to find creative and strategic ways to make our spaces safe and get people more comfortable coming back in when everything, when it's starting to open back up. But also on top of retail design, what we're doing, we're also trying to figure out for our workplace, how do we integrate back into the workplace? Like, how are we going to figure out how our space planning works strategically? And this is actually a store in Amsterdam, just to kind of give an idea of what global store design is and just to see a visual aspect of it. Thank you.
Amah, thank you so much. I'm going to segue into our panel discussion right now. And Ehren, I'm going to begin with you and put you on the spot. I want to ask you, is there a future for our current concept, our current ideas about office in capital letters?
Capital letters. Yes, there is absolutely, as I mentioned on the, looking at our research, that most people really do want to go back to the office. So there is a future. The future is currently a little unclear, and it also a little bit depending on what industry you're in. Let's just say you work in a law firm and you're a new associate there. You probably have an office, which also probably means you have a door you can close and be fairly safe in. So in that case, you're probably not changing your life too much. People that are in a call center or in a kind of new advanced open workplace that has a 5 foot wide benching desk, your life is probably going to be a little different for a while. And you're probably coming into a different sort of existence as far as not working in the office every day. You might be broken up into like an A team and a B team that goes in either every other day, or one team for 2 weeks and then the next team for 2 weeks, and then you're spending the rest of your time working at home. There's a variety of ways that people are trying to understand how to reoccupy the office in that kind of format. And then when you do go back as more of a full-time thing, there's going to be things like your cleaning schedules be far more obvious. So in an office building today, or a couple months ago anyways, your cleaning people would probably show up at 7 o'clock at night when everybody's gone. And now you're going to want to see those people wiping down the handrails and the elevator buttons and that kind of thing for, just to, even if it's a perception of safety, it is still that. So yes, there's actually a fairly bright future for the office, and we're just not quite sure exactly what it is or how many square feet per person it will be. It might be reduced as far as the actual offices and workstation sizes, but it might be increased in the idea that there will be larger and more larger conference rooms and greater amounts of social gathering spots that will be a little larger to increase social distance.
Amah, you mentioned in your presentation that you and your team are focusing on safe spaces and letting your clients feel safe when they're in the retail spaces. So it sounds like the pandemic is already impacting how you're designing physical space. Could you speak to that a little bit more? How soon did your office have to start adjusting your spatial product?
Well, we had to start very soon thinking about it, because when you think about how a store is laid out, everything is very close. All the apparel is close, they're all lined on wall bays. So we really had to start thinking about what are the steps are we going to take to make sure that our consumers are healthy. So we've been working on that gradually. We don't have all the answers, but we will learn through this process. And one of the things that we implement is like sanitizing, having that immediately in the front. Another thing we think about is fitting rooms. How are we going to make that helpful to our consumers who come in and use the fitting room? Are they going to feel comfortable? And another thing we have to think about also is the footwear area. When people are trying on shoes, where they're trying on shoes, where they're going to be standing. If we have like a situation where we put an experience in there, how often is it going to get cleaned? How much space do we want to give them? That affects all areas of our cross-functional teams. So right now, we're looking at all of that and, getting info, gathering info, and kind of trying to figure out how do we collaboratively get all this information so that we do have a really good space without it feeling completely empty, but also using, buy online and pick up in store also.
It's interesting. You just used the adverb collaboratively, and Ben, you were speaking of collaboration in your presentation, and I'm wondering if this idea of shopping as a collaborative activity, right? We have design as collaboration. We have teams working together in collaboration to design these spaces. But I know that for me, shopping was a big social event with my girls or with my sister. I don't shop without them. How does this look on me? Is this color right? Can you go get me this in the larger size, please? So this idea of interacting and collaboration, and now we're in this space of social isolation, which in our country is one of the leading causes of fatalities, second only to car accidents. And so, Ben, I'd like to circle back to you because you were speaking about interacting in the public realm and collaboration at work. And I'm wondering what your thoughts are about minimizing this isolation we have, and then the attendant stigma that we have with isolation, while we still maintain social distancing. So for example, if you're in a store or on the sidewalk and you're trying to maintain social distance 6 feet away from somebody, it's also like the cooties game from when we were little, like, ooh, you have cooties. So there's this level of stigma that even though it's unintentional, we're all dealing with the awkwardness of that, while we really need to minimize this isolation and stigmatization. Could you say a few words about that?
Sure. I think, at least I can speak for my fellow landscape architects, we're already pretty hyper aware of sidewalk widths and things and tree spaces, but I think most of the population is becoming very, very hyper aware of the space around them when they're interacting with other people. And I think everybody, especially that's been working from home, is all of a sudden become very appreciative of public space and public parks, and maybe very aware of where the shortcomings are in investment in those spaces as well. I've been in this house for a couple of months. I think everybody's been locked up, and really the only thing you have to do until maybe a few weeks ago, at least in Baltimore, is you could walk down the street, you could take a walk, you could go to the park, and maybe that park has been kept up, maybe it hasn't. The equity in sharing resources for public parks is also a problem as well. Not everyone has the same access to worthwhile green space in the public realm. And so I think the design with distancing competition actually addressed a lot of those, provided a lot of different solutions on how we can change the processes that we use when we're in that space. If you're going to pick up food, if you're planning on hanging out, if you're just walking by, is a 5-foot sidewalk as a standard really is really correct anymore? Try to pass the 2 strollers. I can't do it on a sidewalk with 4 people at the same time. It really challenges a lot of this kind of set notions we had on what is acceptable in that space. And so I'm hoping it's for the better. I worry that, a lot of people are banking on a vaccine. Okay, we get a vaccine, things can go back to the way they were. And if there's anything we're good at, it's not learning from the past and learning from our, learning lessons. And I hope that there's good things that can turn out of this in terms of how we treat public space.
Ehren, I want to also, I don't want to leave this question yet. I want to turn to you because you mentioned custodial staff and the increased importance of our custodial staffs, but also the increased maybe visibility. And I want to, maybe could you elaborate that on a little bit more, and how your office is beginning to address the needs of custodial staff in design space? What is the conversation going on right now around that?
Well, it depends on, because that usually in most leased buildings is a landlord function. And that landlord function depends on their progressiveness on it depends on the landlord. I think there's a fair amount of them that are trying to do a really good job and be very visible about what it is. And there's some that are really kind of lagging behind and not paying as much attention. But the better ones, what they're trying to do is they'll put somebody in a bright shirt, and and it'll say the sanitization crew or something like that printed on the shirt, and that person then is constantly like going around and spraying some antibacterial around something and wiping it off and making sure that things are as safe as possible. And that's happening on a kind of constant basis, like especially around elevator buttons, around any surface that people are in kind of normal contact with. Restrooms are another really interesting portion of what that is. And right now there are social distancing plans that we're doing for our clients are showing that we're closing off every other stall or every other urinal or every other sink, which that gets really tricky because the restrooms are sized to a capacity for a building. And if we're saying that half of them are shut down, it's how exactly are we living in this building in a correct manner? But getting back to your cleaning thing, those people are shutting that restroom down every couple hours and doing a good wipe down of everything. So it's more expensive for them to do it, but at the same time, it's going to give you a little bit more perception that that you're going to be safe when you go to the office.
I'm going to piggyback on something that you just mentioned about rules and regulations, and last month the Center for Disease Control released recommendations for maximizing ventilation in buildings, fresh air intake, and for meeting and holding meetings and working outdoors. And I'd like to hear from all three of our industry experts about how this can be accomplished realistically. I'm going to start with you, Ben, as our landscape architect. Is it realistic for the Center for Disease Control to tell office workers that they need to hold their meetings outside and move their desk outdoors?
I think it's tough. I think working outdoors has a lot of challenges, but I do think that a lot of the solutions that we've actually developed during COVID can apply to working outside. So previous to this, maybe a firm wasn't completely, didn't have everybody on laptops, didn't have everybody with the ability to come to work remotely, and so had to quickly develop solutions in order to do that. At the same time, when you go to the office, you're in the office, you have a set schedule, and then you leave, and then this has sort of opened up and loosened the sort of perceived walls around doing things in certain amounts of time. And all of those solutions can lend themselves to working outside. So if you have a laptop, if you have a good network connection, because your office is now, made your network a little bit more robust, you can have meetings outside, you can move into those spaces. I think it's what I mentioned before, it's really the availability of that space and infrastructure that's really inhibiting us. There's no reason that you can't take a design discussion outside. I know many landscape architects would love to sit and draw on trace outside. It's just having the right tools. And I think this has provided us a step in the right direction into doing that. But you still have to contend with weather and people and availability of space. So it's always a bit of a challenge.
Amah, how about you? What are your thoughts on the CDC's recommendations for not having interior space, that everybody needs to get outside and go to work?
I think it's pretty interesting. I agree with what Ben said, that it will be very challenging. I look at our office, for instance, we have a lot of employees. We could do walking meetings and maybe having lunch outside instead of going into our cafeteria. Because in our office, we are all pretty close together. So maybe looking at our conference rooms in a different way, maybe locating our conference rooms in a different place, if it's possible, we could have access to more ventilation. I think it's going to be really interesting for interior designers to think about when taking the CDC's recommendation. It is going to be challenging, and I think it takes a lot of strategic thinking.
Ehren, I'd like to ask you about the carbon footprint that's involved in maximizing air exchange in large office buildings. Could you talk to our audience a little bit about the implications of that?
Oh boy. Okay, so new buildings, we have a couple buildings on the boards right now, and in those we are actively looking at a far larger volume of outside air being able to be put into the system. Existing buildings is a lot tougher. Sometimes these things are built in the 50s, 60s, 70s, and there's only so much capacity, and there's only so much you can actually do. Our engineers are, and we're working with several on kind of what do you call it, conceptual ideas for how to do that. But if it's not inherently helpful in the system, it's going to cause more headaches than you might be ready for. And I'm not a professional engineer, so I can't really get into all the little bits and pieces of what that is. But it's sometimes easy, sometimes not. The PNC project we've done in Pittsburgh, which actually includes opening sections of the facade that actually push out into the air and allow direct ventilation. Things like that. Hopefully, you're going to see a little more of. It's very sustainable type of architecture, and especially for a multi-story skyscraper building. But it's not common. And being able to take an existing building and just say we're going to open the windows may or may not be an easy thing to do either. So I don't necessarily know if there's a great idea on that one yet, but newer buildings, you're going to have a much better chance of it. But the outside space, which I didn't get a chance to talk about, that's something that if you have the luxury of being able to be outside, and like my office has a little bit of outside space, and I know that we're designing several buildings right now that have either roof decks or even small balconies are going to be in high demand coming up soon.
So you're anticipating a high demand of balconies and outdoor spaces. That might put an interesting price premium on different types of available real estate for people who are considering investing.
I think it very well will. I think that's one of the things that might change the design of a multi-story office building in the next several years.
Very interesting. What else do the three of you think will change the landscape of office buildings and workspace in the next 3 years? And what is your imagination? Let's talk about drive-throughs, which have been, I've seen traffic jams at Burger King drive-throughs the past 3 months. Do you think we're going to see more drive-throughs? Are we going to go back to the 50s and 60s where there was drive-in movies, drive-in banks, drive-in everything? What about curbside service? Do you anticipate having an increased demand for things like this in the building infrastructure itself? Who wants to take that one first? I'll let you guys jump for it.
Jump for it. Well,
I can start there.
Go ahead, Ben. You start.
Well, I'll steal one of your points, and what I think is that a lot of architecture isn't really set up to do that kind of take out and drop off, and it's a real concern to hear about the need or want to do that, because what it does, it encourages a lot more sprawl, it encourages more cars on the road, it encourages more pollution. And so in an urban environment, it's easy for us to think about, just driving somewhere and picking it up, or walking somewhere and picking it up. But in a suburban environment, it really does increase the strain on the environment to do that. And so I think that, the hope is that we can sort of adapt and roll into continue reducing our reliance on vehicles. But architecture and the outdoor space around it is going to have to change to accommodate these things. It was kind of a fun, kitschy thing to have a pickup window before, like you could come pick up your coffee or something like that without coming into a coffee shop. I think that kind of thing is actually going to become a lot more prevalent moving forward. And what that does, hopefully, is that you can reduce the amount of space you actually need for inside dining or need inside an environment, and use the outdoor space a little bit more.
Yeah, no, it's a great start, because you're absolutely right. You know, making every building have a drive-through is going to be a massive change to the civil infrastructure around basically every building, and that's not going to be really that doable. Suburban probably has a better chance at trying to do something like that, but it's still very tricky. One point I was going to bring up, Ben, the idea of this kind of pickup culture, I think will definitely continue, but we'll have to find very creative ways to be able to have people accept a very short-term parking area or something like that near a business entrance.
Amah, could you please elaborate from an interior designer's point of view about Ben and Ehren's comments about how a drive-through reduces the need for some interior space? What are your thoughts about the curbside culture that we're developing right now in the short term?
My thoughts on this, more when it comes to the retail spaces and malls, because you know some stores have done BOPUS before this has even happened on the buy online and pick up in store. You just have a certain area in the store where you know everything's already there, it's already set up that you bought online, and you just come and pick it up. Depending on how close you live to the store, it can reduce the time for shipping, so you don't have to worry about shipping or shipping costs. You just drive there. But I think this will become really popular, and sometimes you do see it even with restaurant design. You just go in, pick it up, take it right back out. But I think this is something that more retailers are definitely going to have to look into even more, is the idea of BOPUS.
I think it was happening everywhere across our culture. I saw the high school students in my neighborhood, and they had a drive-by graduation ceremony where their high school principal handed them their diploma through their car window.
Exactly.
So it's leaking through all sorts of our culture, not only retail and the service industry, but in the education. I know that in Catonsville, students were picking up their homework assignments in brown bags. Their families would drive by and they'd get that week's package of work in a brown bag, so they could take home and get their schoolwork done. It's interesting to see where we're going to take this, and
I actually wonder if it's going to change automotive design, that you're going to have a like the Domino's little truck that they've built. Will you have a remote enclosing opening section that somebody can drop your food or your new shoes into or something like that, with you have to never even opening the window?
Oh, it's wonderful. That's wonderful, Ehren. It sounds like something from the Jetsons.
Yeah.
That would be fantastic. I want to ask one more question of you all. As designers, we know that the built environment can reinforce social and economic discrimination. And we're in a very momentous time in our society's history. We're living through history. How do you see each of your professions right now reacting to this, to the pressures on us as design professionals and as people and neighbors?
Maybe I can start with that. I think we've all had to reevaluate kind of how we approach both our personas as designers, but how we approach our work and really the projects that we work on too. It's really an interesting thing to see, when you work on public space, that public space being used, and that's always the intent for it to be used flexibly, but used in a different way and even beyond what you potentially imagined. You design places to be inviting and things like that, and for that space to become, potentially the source of injustice or the place in which it's protested is really something different to consider in your day-to-day work. And so I think design professionals need to, take a really hard look at the kind of work that we're promoting, the kind of people we're encouraging to be in the industry, and really what we might be excluding as well, and making sure we're thinking about the broad spectrum of life and not just kind of these singular idealized ideas of spaces. The availability of good design to everyone. It's hard when we were talking about schools, we were talking about public parks, and we were talking about, if you go look at the budget, for instance, of Baltimore City, you can see how small those things are by comparison. And so if we are to better provide safety in those spaces and, evolve, are we shortchanging future generations and people who have less access to good design,
And as I see the changes in the office happen, if it goes the way I imagine that it will, we'll have a change in the hierarchical idea that these people have an office and these people have this size workstation and these people don't, and into a more kind of collegiate atmosphere where hierarchy of the company isn't necessarily represented in walls and doors and workstation types. That people will be able to interact with each other on a much more casual and level playing field.
Amah, how are you talking about this as a designer of interior space, but of public interior spaces?
Amongst my other friends and I who are also interior design, we kind of talk about this a good amount of times, especially with how funds are allocated for us as designers to really address being level with public spaces and everything, and paying more close attention to just different areas in the city. Like, how do we find ways to design for all areas and not just as like an interior designer, oh, we only do this kind of design or that kind of design, but we always work hard towards seeing where we can put our expertise.
Fantastic. I want to thank the three of you so much. We've got a few questions that are starting to come up in the chat box. To our audience, please, if you've got any questions, please go ahead and type them into the Zoom group chat. Don't worry if the question is too small, and I'll read them out to our panel. So let's see, one of the first questions that we received was about, I think, some of the research that was presented in the beginning of our discussion. Why are the major reasons for many people still liking to go to the office? Why do people need to go to the office?
It really is it's a cultural issue. People really need to kind of bond with their employees, with their they have a shared mission, and it's hard to share that mission when you're just a little tiny box on the screen about that big, right? So being able to see these people in person and have a kind of immediate reaction and kind of shared experience is a big deal. I think I mentioned before also that being able to learn from other generations in the workplace is something that's far more appreciable in person. And it's the kind of thing, kind of casually walking by somebody and asking them a question about, oh, how did you do this one thing 3 years ago when you had that one client? When we have to set up a meeting or look for them to be available on Skype or something like that, that drops away really quickly. So it's the younger generations are having a very difficult time kind of learning from their I'd say elders in the field, but that's sort of what it is. That's sort of the main reason. Plus, a lot of people don't have very good setups at home. you're single and you live in a 1-bedroom apartment, and that your desk is right next to your bed, so you never get away from it. I mean, it's tough to live that way, especially in a situation where people are on a lockdown or something like that. Not being able to get out of that space ever is hard on people.
Yes.
I think, Suzanne, you're talking about the social isolation, and that's a huge part of it right there.
Yeah,
Not
it
being
is.
so isolated.
Yeah, it is tough. And I can imagine, I've been through a lot of meetings where there's like 4-year-olds whizzing around the background
Yeah.
and the bandwidth, because there's children doing their schoolwork, their spouses, and they're having an office meeting, and it's an awful lot. Ben or Amah, did you want to weigh in?
You can go ahead. I think I really agree with a lot of Ehren's points. And it has been really tough. I mean, I have a 6-month-old running around. Well, he's not running yet, but around making noise, and it's hard to separate work and life. But at the same time, there are positives we can take, I think, from this situation. I'm not in firm leadership, but I think having a relationship between staff and firm leadership, and having those touch points like Ehren was talking about, kind of at work, is really lost. And so really you have to make up for it by almost over communicating with people a little bit to check on them. How's your life going? Because now life's part of their work. At the same time, that idea that, you come into work and you need to be seen working, people see you working, you're seen working. And when you're at home, that kind of nervousness about like, oh, do people know that I'm doing enough hours or doing enough work or putting in enough effort? I think sort of the stigma of that is loosening a little bit, and the level of trust between coworkers and staff is increasing a little bit. People know that everyone else is struggling because we're all in this together. Not so and so is going home, doing nothing and turning in mediocre work. So I think there are some positives we can take out of this to loosen up a little bit of the paradigms we've had historically in the office. But definitely I'm missing being with my coworkers. I'm missing learning from each other a great deal.
Amah, as a designer right now of retail space, I wonder what you all are thinking about the retail employees in regards to people. They're not going to an office, but the store is their office, and there's a back of house, I'm guessing, where they do a lot of inventory and paperwork and have staff meetings. What are the considerations for you at Under Armour in this instance?
As far as like the teammates and stuff, that's an interesting point you bring up with the back of house, because that is one of the things we definitely put a lot of concentration into when it comes to designing stores, the back of house, the employees, and how they feel back there, our teammates, because they're almost like our core. And we want them to feel as comfortable as possible. I believe that they do miss the working in that environment too. I hope they miss it too. And I know we miss working in the office too. But I do agree with what Ben said about, working from home is building trust. I feel a different type of connection between like my coworkers working from home, so that when we do get back to office, which we all do miss, I think it'll be even stronger.
Thanks. Let's see, we've got, here's another in-depth question. Towards the end of our conversation, we started to talk about equity in design. Do our 3 panelists see changes due to this pandemic getting property owners to think more equitably about design? Or will it be the design professional's responsibility to guide the client towards equity in design? Let's see. That's since I'm going to start with Amah. I'm going to throw you into the fire on this one. So because you are designing for a specific company, how does that work? is it like a puppy chasing its own tail at Under Armour? How does it? There must be some sort of formalized dialogue about how does Under Armour do that? How do you work through that issue?
That's a good question that I don't know if I have the exact answers to, but I'm looking at the question. I think I almost want to say it may take both the design professional's responsibility and the property owners. I kind of wish I had more insight on that one, but I think because the way that we are kind of set up, because it's just our GSDD team, I'd be interested in seeing more insight in that too, actually.
It's a very, very good question.
Yeah.
Ehren, what about a Gensler? How does
isn't the design professional responsible for everything now? Really? No, I really do think it probably is a lot of our responsibility to understand how to, because there's a lot of what we do that we speak to our clients about that encapsulates the ideas of kind of social equity and things like that into what we do every day. Once we build the trust of the client, they can understand how we're putting those things together for them. And just like, for a while when we did lead projects, it was always a push to say, well, you want to do this one? And it was like, well, how much more is that going to be? But eventually it became part of the way we do work. And it was really a no cost issue. And I see the same thing happening here. As we work through this, we'll be much more facile about the idea of this is how you design for this need, and it'll become more accepted as time goes on, hopefully very quickly.
Fingers crossed. That would be fantastic. Ben, if you could weigh in on that too, particularly as a landscape architect and for all people's having agency and feeling safe in public space. What's going on in the landscape architecture world?
I mean, I think it's really challenging. I think the question really points out that kind of the issue of the fact that our design is so site specific. And so it's hard to address a large issue beyond the confines of your site. And then usually when you're brought onto a project, so many things are already, figured out by whoever, the developer or the owner or the city, and what they want to see out of the space. And your job is to kind of move the pieces around to work well. And so we're, to your point, like chasing our own tail a little bit, trying to change the character of a project post it's already been figured out is really hard. And I think where designers have an opportunity is, and Ehren talked about this, that Gensler does it too, is doing our own research, providing our own potential projects. We have a research division at our office, and we, tackle problems like this and, create our own work essentially where we see the need is. In years past, as Ehren pointed out, the focuses have been on stormwater, and to a certain degree, that was a niche problem that the general public maybe wasn't as concerned with. But this is a systemic problem that everyone can see, I think, now. And so my hope is that when clients come to us for design work, or when we are looking for the kind of work that we want to do, that equity design is a much bigger focus of things going forward.
We've got 3 minutes left, and we've got 3 questions. So are you guys, have you got your thinking caps on? These are going to be rapid fire because they're pretty good questions. Let's see. Going further than 5+ years, have any of your companies thought about the role of virtual reality and its role in the workplace or the retail environment? Could there be a digital office?
Yes.
Yeah.
No, it's actually, I read way back when I was talking earlier about, commuting to DC. One book I read is called Snow Crash. And that was a lot about this. It was early on in this idea that you had this avatar, and it was kind of whatever you would want it to be, and it existed in this kind of second life kind of application. Yes, there probably is something like that. It's probably not in the very near future, but it's definitely something that's on the radar. real person face to face is still going to win out over most cases, but you never know. 5 years is a long way away.
Okay, second question, 2 more to go. The office trends in recent years have featured less square footage per employee and an emphasis on collaborative workstations. And that's a direct contradiction to social distancing. Are you expecting companies to abandon that strategy?
No, actually, it's if your space is designed correctly, the actual square footage per person has actually risen. It isn't necessarily around your own individual workplace, but it is it's like the idea of me space and we space. The me space has gone down, but the we space is increased dramatically. It's really how we look at what that we space is. And so I don't necessarily believe the overall square footage may go down. Your we space will continue to grow, but your me space, especially if you don't have a one-to-one, everybody has a desk kind of an idea, but more of a shared workplace as a kind of a more of a hoteling situation, that may go down. It'll probably still stick around to a 6-foot diameter, at least as CDC guidelines, but.
And Amah, you touched on this a little bit earlier about was particularly, and the example was selling shoes. So how are you working through those spatial ratios now in your office?
So we already have like smaller collaborative spaces where there's maybe only 1 or 2 people in there. We have a lot of those more than we have the larger spaces. So I think we may just improve on it, but I don't know if they're just going to border up the space a little bit more, like maybe add more like temporary walls around them. But I think that's maybe where they would start to look with those smaller like collaborative spaces. We have more of those than probably the conference rooms.
And here's our last question, and this is a fantastic question, a very important issue. So does it seem that providing children's spaces within firms to offer the employees with children an option to work from home or in the office will become part of future design? And I know a lot of my colleagues are worried about this because the kids aren't going back to full-time school in the fall. So what do you think about providing some sort of creche in an office in the future?
I think it'd be a good idea because for our office, we do have the daycare right next to our office. So you literally just come in, you place your child in daycare, and you're right there, so you can see them right there. So it'd be interesting to kind of redesign it to see how, with them not going back to school, how that could be designed. Maybe the daycare is now more of like a mini school. I don't know how that works, but with the parents being there working, but maybe it is like switching back and forth.
I think it's really
Yeah,
tough.
my son was in that daycare back in 2004. Hey, I've always been a proponent of the Velcro wall also, just stick them up there. I imagine that we probably will see more kids in the office though.
I think that was already becoming a little bit more acceptable. I think the challenge we have now is
But
that
the Velcro wall?
The Velcro wall was more acceptable. I would absolutely love to add one of those to my house. And we were going to go to that daycare too. But it's the reason that we're having kids at home is because of the spread of disease. So then now to make offices also operate a childcare facility, it's just one more ask to overhead. And so I think it's tough as, providing it as a service, but it's becoming more and more of a standard, I think, to allow flexibility with people's work time and everything else. So I hope it's trending that way.
Well, and with that, we have run out of time. I just want to thank the 3 of you, Amah, Dokyi, Ben Boyd, and Ehren Gaag. Thank you so much for your time this afternoon. Nathan, are you going to sign off for us?
Yes, thank you, everybody. This was a fantastic program. So thank you again, Ben, Ehren, and Amah. And Suzanne, your amazing moderator. Thank you.
Thanks for having us. All right, bye.
Bye.
Thanks, everybody. Stay safe,
everybody.
stay well.
Bye.